Thank you. Now, my beautiful wife released a book last year, the first one. It's brilliant. And in there, so if you like that stuff where we talked about the marriage we see, it's actually in this book. She's got a chapter on that. So I don't know, Rach, whether she doesn't like talking about it, but I'm going to make her. All right, so why don't you tell people what was on your heart when you wrote this and how it helps people?
Well, actually, during lockdown, remember the lockdown days? My daughter Melody, she stayed in Australia to continue studies and etc. And I was missing her so much, plus lockdown, plus everything happening, and pastoring so many people. We found that in the middle of this time, they needed their soul to be refreshed and recharged. And the scripture, 3 John 2, beloved, I pray that you would prosper in all things and be in health as your soul prospers. If your soul flourishes, everything flourishes. So Melody and I were talking on the phone about some of the young adults and some of the older women and people in our church, marriages. We needed to go back to refresh our soul. So we decided to write a devotional. And so there's 30 days. It's when your soul needs a holiday. A 30-day devotional. It's mainly focused on women, but a lot of the men have read and enjoyed too. So some of the topics would be things like when your soul is discouraged, when your soul needs to dream again, when your soul needs to know you're loved, when your soul needs to hear from God, when your soul needs to enlarge. And it's split into 3. Rest, I always think on a holiday, there's 3 parts to a holiday or to a vacation, you guys call it. It's rest, and then time to replenish, and then time to recharge before you get back home and look at your next season. So that's what this is about.
Brilliant. I've seen Rachel live out these principles for many years. She put them in a book. It's really practical. So girls,
so whether you're
great for your teens
15
as well.
or 50 plus.
Yeah, it's a great book. So you can get it afterwards if you want to. Anyway, over to you, darling.
Thank you. So this part is how to communicate in marriage. Communication is essential. In marriage, we communicate both verbally and non-verbally, and we're going to look about how to make communication our secret ingredient to building a strong, healthy marriage. Proverbs 18:21 says, death and life are in the power of the tongue, and those who love it will eat its fruit. We often quote the death and life, and it's so true. You've got to absolutely love the power of the tongue and communication. And what you love, you will make time for and value, and you will see the fruit of it. Proverbs 18:21 in the Message says, words kill, words give life. They're either poison or fruit. You choose. How true is that? We make the choice whether we're giving, and we wouldn't purposely poison our spouse, but so quickly those words can make a lasting difference. And even when you apologize, they can come back up later in another argument, can't they? So it's so important, the words that we choose. Communication is so essential, especially in busy life. So back in the day, 25 years ago, when I first qualified, when I first finished school, I studied as a physical therapist, and I worked as specialized. Part of my role was in cardiac rehab. And so when someone has a heart attack, we do an ECG to look at the health and strength of their heart. ECG, yeah, you're familiar with ECG. So we've used that to help do the 3 points of communication. ECG. What is the heart of your marriage like? The heart of communication. So first of all, E stands for encouragement. C is communication, or communicate, take time to communicate. And G is to grow. Keep growing. So we're going to go through that now. So first of all, encourage, ECG. Encourage. John Maxwell, you all know about John Maxwell, leadership guru. I love his books. He says, a word of encouragement from a teacher to a child can change a life. A word of encouragement from a spouse can save a marriage. A word of encouragement from a leader can inspire a person to reach her or his full potential. What you sow, you'll reap. We understand this principle spiritually about when we tithe or when we give. It's so true of our words. When your marriage seems barren, lifeless, we're often taught the principle when something's dead or you don't have a lot or you don't have a lot of finance, you give to God. he will bless and honor that faithful step. It's the same with our communication. When things don't look good, you've actually got to sow into it. I say to women all the time when they're angry at their spouse and they feel like they're neglected, they're not being valued, I often say to them, when's the last time you encouraged your husband? And they look at me like, he needs to encourage me. I'm like, you need to sow. You need to look at what he's doing that you've taken for granted and purposefully encourage. So encouragement is every day. But encouragement is just encourage, is putting courage in. Because no matter how confident our spouse seems or is, they still need encouragement. And there's probably no one else that could encourage me more, and the same vice versa, than your spouse, because they know you inside out. So to say something you genuinely appreciate, the shoulders go back, the confidence, the strength.
We men are quite hilarious, aren't we? We look like we're so strong and we have it all together, but let's face it, boys, we all need a bit of encouragement. There's times when we just need someone to lift us, and thank God for our wives that they do that. So girls, even if they seem like they're too busy, they don't need it, keep speaking life. And it works both ways.
And look at those things that you've maybe just taken for granted, that they always do. You know, the way he is with our daughters, he's a brilliant dad to our girls. Sometimes I can just take that for granted. And I noticed it when we were away on holiday together recently, what a great relationship he has with them. And just to stop and say, oh, you're brilliant, the way you handle our girls, the way you are with them. Or even if he's taking the rubbish out every day. I love the way you take the bin out, the trash, sorry, that's the right word, the trash.
Somebody has to.
I love the way you stack that dishwasher, darling. What you sow, you will reap, okay? So don't assume that they know they're appreciated just because they're good at something. So Steve is a brilliant preacher. He has been. He was first asked to preach by his youth pastor back when he was 15. Is that right? 15, 16. So he's been brilliant all of his life. It's grown and matured. And so sometimes I can assume, I don't need to, he needs to encourage me. But actually, the feedback that I can give him after he's preached, it means the world. So look at the things that they're naturally good at and also encourage them. Don't take each other for granted. Let your kids, I talked about your kids hearing when you apologize. Let your kids hear you encourage your spouse. So obviously, I'm sure you all do this. Hopefully, intentionally speak life to your kids and encourage them. But do the same with your spouse so that the kids can hear. I remember, how many of you are good at this? You look at all the things, so they might have done 10 things that's brilliant, and you notice the one thing that they didn't do. Who's good at that? I noticed I did that not so long ago, and Steve, or like sometimes you give him the list of grocery things because I didn't get time to go, and he said, I'll pick it up on the way home from work because I'm picking up the kids. And I give him the list.
Get the text
and
of
he
all
gets
the things you've got to pick
everything,
up.
and there's one thing that he didn't get.
And what does she focus in on when you get home? The one thing you didn't get, rather than thanks for getting those 9. But anyway, she has acknowledged it. I'm not bitter.
Yes. Or, I thank him that he's a timekeeper, that he's brilliant at it, rather than that's so annoying. And, we get somewhere like 20 minutes, half an hour early, and we're sitting around waiting. I don't get annoyed and comment on it. I'm like, thank you for keeping us stress-free. And so a word of encouragement during a failure is worth more than an hour of praise after success. So remember that. A word of encouragement during a failure is worth more than an hour of praise after success. Really important with marriage, with your kids, in leadership, is to keep encouraging when something is perceived as a failure.
Great. So on encouragement, this is something I learned in the business world. It's called the Lasada line. Some of you guys and girls are in business, so maybe you could put up that picture of the Lasada line. Just have a quick look at it. The Lasada line, it's a slightly contentious mathematical formula, and Dr. Lasada discovered it in 2005. And what it does is it looked at teams and thought, what makes a healthy team or what makes a team that isn't healthy? And they analyzed essentially every bit of communication within the team and assigned it either a positive or a negative. And then they looked at what the ratio should be of positive to negative for a team to be healthy or dysfunctional. And so they analyzed thousands of these interactions, okay? And what they discovered that if the ratio is 3-to-1, so that there was 3 positives and 1 negative, now you'd think that would be good, wouldn't you? 3 positives to 1 negative, then you'd think that would be a healthy team. Actually, no. Because even at a ratio of 3-to-1, it wasn't healthy. You need a minimum of 4-to-1, but ideally 6-to-1. So for every negative, there should be 6 positives for the team to. Now, in some cases, for a new team, it needs to be 10-to-1. So this Lasada principle, which made sense in a team, I applied this to marriage. So if you think about that, for every negative, you need to give at least 6 positives. If you want your marriage to be healthy, the words you speak have got to be constantly and consistently life-giving. So I wonder, if you were to look at your Lasada line in your marriage, what would it be? So for you personally, how many lots of encouragement do you give to the negatives? That's really challenging, isn't it? And I remember one time because this is easy to preach like this, really easy. I remember one time I did a fantastic teaching at church on encouragement and how important it is. And afterwards, Rich was really gracious, gave me some great feedback. And then she masterfully said this, and she said, and don't forget, sometimes I need encouragement too. And I'm like, well, of course I encourage you. I encourage you all the time. In my mind, I'm the master encourager of my wife. And then, so I said, what do you mean? It got a bit defensive, a bit feisty at the missus. And I said, I'm always encouraging you. And then she said, when was the last time you encouraged me? And I went, well, the last time was, and I drew a blank. So I started thinking, and I couldn't think of the last time I encouraged her. And our marriage was great at the time. But it showed me how easily you can think you're encouraging, but actually have you. Your spouse can't jump into your head. You have to do it way more. Craig Groeschel talks about in ministry, he says, if you want to learn how much to encourage the people around you, think about how much you think you need to encourage them, and then double it, and then double it again.
Oh, wow.
So how encouraging are you to your spouse? When was the last time you encouraged them?
Something you say as a northern lad, sometimes the tendency, and it can be a culture thing as well, is a tendency can be a bit negative. And sometimes our culture in England can be, a little bit seeing the glass half empty rather than the glass half full. I don't know what the culture's like here.
The Aussies call us whinging poms because we're always negative.
We whine.
They say, how are you? I said, not so bad. Well, it could be worse.
Under the
Americans are much more
circumstances.
positive. We're a whinging bunch. And as Northerners, the way we talk about marriage growing up, like you would put your wife down all of the time. Make all these sarcastic
Why did the woman cross
jokes.
the road? It's not the point. She should be at the kitchen sink.
Yeah,
Things like
that's
that.
a kind
like
of joke.
Real terrible jokes,
And they still do it up north.
Yeah.
So for me to learn to be positive about my wife, like if I'm at a checkout line at like Target, let's say, and I'll sometimes talk to, how's life? And I'll say, yeah, doing great. This is my wife. She's fantastic, isn't she? And literally, you can see people's mouths hung open because we live in a culture where you talk negatively about your wife.
I remember in a staff room when I worked as a physical therapist lots of years ago before we'd moved to Australia, and they would all talk so negatively about their spouses. It was just the done thing, and they used to laugh about it. And it's interesting, 25 years later, coming back to Norwich and finding out about some of these women and where they are and what they're doing. Nearly all of them, their marriages have ended in divorce, or they're no longer with their partner.
Because what you reap, what you sow, you reap. Death and life are in the power of the tongue. You will eat its fruit. It's just a question of time. So much better to speak words of life over your partner and your marriage.
Encourage. E. C. Communicate. So make the time to communicate. So we've talked about the date nights already. We've talked about the marriage that I see, the Mawston Mondays, the holiday breaks, the planning ahead where possible. Communication, when we had the one car, we had to plan when the other person needs the car. And we're doing that a little bit now back at home because we've got our oldest daughter back again and she doesn't have a car at the minute, so we're kind of sharing cars and it's planning ahead. Now, if you just take for granted that they know, it can cause tension, right? So it's just really practical, the communication. Be aware of each other's plans. Don't drop things on your partner at the last minute, like, I've planned a meeting, so you have to look after the kids. Or I've invited so-and-so back to the house, and you're not prepared for that because you've got something else on. There's nothing worse, I think, than somebody not considering your time. And so just communicating the practicals. For a while, we would have on our fridge door, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and who's doing what at which times can really help. So ask each other's opinion of something that you're doing to help each other out. That's another important thing. We talk about everything, and now that we work a lot closer together in ministry, we'll often communicate the debrief, but also, how can I help you with what you're doing? Rather than just focus on what my essentials are for that week or work, how can we help each other? So we said earlier, get good at saying I'm sorry, and encourage. A third thing would be, how can I help you? What can I do for you this week that would make your week better? So communicate. Tell them, another thing is, say good night and good morning, and every time, you think that's obvious, but always kiss each other good night, always kiss each other good morning, and not just assume that you get on with your busy day. And sometimes when you walk into a room and we're all on the phones, same with our kids, but to each other, put the phone down, put down what you're doing at that moment, acknowledge that and just be excited to see them. It's just the little principles that make a big difference.
These are really basic things, but I remember... there's a couple called Lucinda and Phil Dooley. Phil's just taken over from Pastor Brian Houston, leading Hillsong Church. And Lucinda, I remember her sharing with us one time about she'd seen Oprah Winfrey, the last show that Oprah did. And think about all the amazing people Oprah had through her show. And the interviewer said, looking back over all of the amazing people that you've interviewed, successful and brilliant, what was the biggest takeaway that you had, the biggest lesson you learned? And surprisingly, Oprah said there was a psychologist that came and said that when a child walks into a room, they are instinctively looking at what reaction the parent will give the child as they walk in. Do they notice the child? Do they validate the child? Or do they simply ignore the child? And the psychologist proved that the way a parent acknowledges the child in those early years has a massive impact on their development. And I thought of all the things that Oprah would say was the biggest learning point, it was that. So when it comes to your kids, when it comes to your spouse, when they walk in the room, do you acknowledge them? Do you hug them? Do you kiss them? Do you appreciate it? Or do we just assume on them? Because when a marriage drifts, you don't talk. You don't acknowledge. You don't hug. So make sure these basics are right. If you want to build a healthy, make sure these basic building blocks are in there.
So ECG, grow your heart to hearts. So it's part of the communication. Encourage, take time to communicate the essentials. And thirdly, grow your heart to hearts. Now, you might call it a D&M, deep and meaningful, a heart to heart, when you just go past the superficial communication. So it goes beyond who needs the car, when, or encouragement. This is where you become soulmates. And you need time for that to really connect. Again, Oprah, Steve mentioned Oprah Winfrey. She said that the success of her years doing what she did, interviewing people, was vulnerability. Vulnerability is the cornerstone of confidence. And sometimes we find it really hard to open up. And the tendency sometimes is for the men They find it hard to really open up and talk, but sometimes it can be the other way around. And so growing the heart-to-heart times, you need time for that. And to intentionally plan it in is better, as I said earlier, than doing it after you've had a massive argument. Sometimes those real layers of heart-to-hearts only happen when there's tears or when there's been a big fallout or a major problem. But try and pick your times and plan it ahead. Remember I said at the beginning, choose who you want to be when you're strong, who you want to be. So when the times are weak, there's something to draw on. So vulnerability is so important. Vulnerability opens the door to greater intimacy. Vulnerability or sharing your heart is actually really attractive. Vulnerability is the key to greater courage and clarity of purpose. Vulnerability is being authentic. It's letting go of what other people think. It's allowing the Holy Spirit, and we're going to pray for you all at the end today, allowing the Holy Spirit to highlight in your heart, first of all, the things that you need to change and work on, and communicating to your spouse about what God needs to do in you, first of all. And in this process, we actually become more like Jesus. We become more in his image when we're really real and really honest, and we reflect him in our marriages, when we're honest, open, and vulnerable. But growth actually happens. Were you going to say something there?
I was just going to say, vulnerability, for us guys, it's really hard to be vulnerable.
Yeah, it takes great courage.
You gotta be vulnerable with your spouses. Here's one of the things I've seen about affairs, is that often a female will be in the office or whatever, and they'll start asking you questions, and then the men will start to become vulnerable on an emotional level, and that's really dangerous. If you're being more vulnerable with any other female than your spouse, you got to really watch that and turn that around quickly.
And vice versa.
Yeah. So I just felt that guys, if that's happening, if there's another female asking you about the parts of your heart that you don't talk about with your wife, you're on the rocks. You're on the rocks. You've got to be really careful and get out of there, because it can do a lot of damage to your marriage. So opening up your heart. So, this had to become a discipline for me, because when I got in from work, the last thing I wanted was for Rach to start asking me in great detail about how I was, because I was tired, I was exhausted. She'd been at home with the kids, so she hadn't had much interaction. So that's often a really difficult time. So I had to learn that, right, I don't feel like going for a walk and talking to her, but I will. And the more you do these disciplines, they then become a delight. One of the greatest things I love doing now is going for a walk with Rachel on a it's not every day, but nearly every other day. And we just do it all the time now. What was first a discipline has now become a delight. So if you'll do those hard yards, you will build a vulnerable and intimate marriage relationship.
And walking's a bit less intense. Just walk and talk. I do a prayer walk every day, and that's the way I talk to God as well. So I think if you can incorporate that, and you're getting some fresh air and some health along the way too. But growth actually begins at the end of your comfort zone. And it takes some confidence to do that. I remember going through a really challenging time a few years back, and I suffered a big disappointment. I remember my response to difficult times was often, put your lipstick on, quote the word, everything will be fine. I'm the thermostat in the home. I keep going. Everything is okay, it's okay. And when everyone asks if you're okay, I'm fine. But I remember just even at church, chatting in the foyers before and after, I was kind of putting up, like smiling, but not really connecting. So vulnerability means, and I remember seeing a psychologist at the time, he said, Rachel, you're trying to be Wonder Woman. You're trying to be this, do it all, pastor people, look after your home. You actually got to be vulnerable. And I remember talking to my kids, they're both a lot younger at the time, and I remember one of them in particular saying, have you noticed Mummy's been really sad recently? And I convinced the psychologist when he said to be vulnerable with them. I was like, no, they wouldn't have a clue what I'm going through. Everything's great at home. He said, I can tell you they'll have picked up on it. And I'm like, no, they won't. And when I spoke to both of them, they said straight away, yes, we've noticed you've been upset. And Daddy keeps saying, be nice to Mummy. And I'm like, I can't believe they noticed. But they do, they pick up on it. And I remember I just had to be really vulnerable without dumping on them. They're 5 years apart, so I could say more to Melody than I could Mercy. Being vulnerable and honest with my boss at the time and with my husband. And it made a massive impact.
So we're going to have a moment of vulnerability. Just you guys. All right, so if we can put the reflection questions on there, guys, it's an exercise. Be really honest. So question number 1, how well are we doing in our marriage? So no, what are we doing well? So in every marriage, hopefully there's something good that you're doing. All right? You might have to dig to look for that if it's been hard going, but what are you doing well? And secondly, what do you need to get better at? And thirdly, what's one thing? So out of everything we've said today, what's one thing you can agree on as a married couple? Let's do this. It might be a date night. It might be take time to write the marriage you see. It might be whatever. But try and agree one thing that you want to get better at to improve your marriage. And then fourthly, try and think about, okay, how are we going to, we've started the process today, but how can we continue it? Again, it might be a date night. It might be once a month you put an hour in the diary to say, hey, how's our marriage going? Let's go out for dinner or for coffee. So I'm going to give you about 3 minutes as a couple to look at that and to be really honest and have a conversation about it. So again, for your privacy, we'll have a bit of music in the background and we'll give you 3 minutes to chat those questions through as a couple. Go for it. Give you 1 more minute, guys. You can do more of this at home this week, but 1 more minute.
Just one thing to focus on there. We've got the questions, what one thing can we do to improve our marriage? Make it a bit more personal. And one of you say, this is what I'm going to do. And then the other person say, this is what I'm going to do to
that's
improve.
good.
So you're both taking ownership for something you can change.
So we'll give you 1 more minute on that. What can I do? And then share it with your spouse. And then we're going to invite Derek and Maggie? Derek and Maggie are great
We know
as
another
well.
couple called Derek and
But it's
Maggie.
be Derek and Michelle on this occasion.
That's Bonnie's parents, Derek and Maggie. So there's actually another part that we were going to do, but we do it after the Q&A because it's more of a spiritual side
okay.
to keeping Jesus
All right,
in the
that's good.
center.
That's
so
good
I'll
notes.
leave
How long will
that
you
bit
need?
5 minutes.
5 minutes, okay.
Before we pray.
Perfect. Okay.
Yeah. We've got our back to these guys. First, these guys be able to see.
See her, not me.
All right. Are we good? It's been so good, hasn't it? Come on, how many of you have been encouraged? I know you can feel beat up sometimes by something like this, but you shouldn't feel beat up. You should feel like we have things to work on, and that's a good thing, that we have direction to work on to allow our marriages to get to a healthier place. And so we're going to do some Q&A. You guys have sent in some really good stuff, and I'm excited about this. We may not get through all of it. We're going to do our best to crank through this because we really want to focus on prayer at the end. And I want to start this out by first with an icebreaker. Question for Rachel: are your shoes from Target too? I need a pair, and where can I get them?
No, they're not from Target.
They're not from Target. Okay. Perfect. Well, whoever that is, you can find Rachel afterwards. Those ones are from Target, you said? No. Oh, they're not from Target. Okay. No. So whoever you are, you can ask Rachel afterwards. Here's a good question. What happens when you and your spouse are at two different stages? How do you reconcile? Example, you think your marriage is hot and warm, and your spouse thinks it's cool. So how do you reconcile that if you feel like you're at different spots?
And that can happen often, can't it? Steve thinks we're doing great. It's usually that way around. And I'm like, we need to do better at this. We're not really communicating here. And again, it's the importance of spending time to talk it through, but also not pointing the finger. I think that's something I learned, is that he's not the problem. I need to take ownership with that as well. So sometimes we can do that. We can you're not talking to me enough. You're not this, you're not that. It's actually, what can I do to help?
In a marriage, everything's flipped. So it's not about, my job in marriage is not to make me feel good. It's actually to make sure it's great for Rachel. So the important is not whether I think it's hot, it's am I living my life in such a way and serving her and meeting her needs to the degree to which she feels like she's in a great marriage. If that's your priority, if your marriage is about serving her needs or his needs above your own, then you're going to have a healthy marriage. The moment it becomes about you and me and you're in big trouble. Nothing reveals your selfishness in life like getting married. Can you remember that? You thought going in, I don't need to do marriage prep. I love my fiance. Then you get married and suddenly all this stuff comes up and you realize you're absolutely selfish. And it's your ability to deal with that and to learn to serve another person. So the real measure is not how you think it's doing. The real measure is actually how your partner thinks it's doing and meeting her needs or his needs.
I'm looking at the red flags, on the beach that we started with, the flag on the beach. Sometimes one of you has drifted way out and the other one's still trying to keep it in the zone. And that can often happen. But it's just both of you looking at what the flags are again.
But actually talking about the differences, coming back to sex, I remember when we first got married, I just wanted to have sex all the time. I mean, why most guys do when you first get married. And then when we started to have these conversations and Rachel started to talk about her emotional needs, it really helped me to see that, okay, what is a hot marriage? It's like, well, let's get the emotional intimacy right, let's get the communication right, and it will lead to all of that. So just the fact that you're seeing a difference, one thing is start to have that conversation. And that is it can be a difficult process, but I think it's going to be a really good process for you both.
Very good. How do you break the tension and bring things back when you've had an argument besides saying you're sorry? So how do you How do you break the tension, get things back to, because, obviously I'm sorry I think this is what they're alluding to, can just be quick and trivial, but how do we really break that tension and get things back to normal?
Yeah, look, one of the things I do in our family, not just in our marriage, but with our kids, is humor. Try and use humor to diffuse things, because otherwise the tension just keeps escalating. So I would find 2 or 3 things that you can use that are just circuit breakers. Yeah. And even when you're feeling, I'll sometimes say, look, it's probably not the time. Let's just chill, get a coffee, have a bit of a laugh about something. Let's talk about it again a little bit later.
Laughter is really good. Another thing is the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Stephen Covey says, seek first to be understood, to understand, then to be understood. I think that has been the key. Understand first what the other person is going through. Right. And then
so the moment I can stop thinking about me and mine, I can do this, I'll think, okay, why is she so angry? And I start to look at me from her perspective. Then I quickly see why. But sometimes I'm so full of my own perspective that I fail to do that. But the moment I start to do that, I think, oh, I get it. And there might be other reasons in Rach. There's something else going on in her world, that she's anxious about or not feeling valued. And so really, it's that, and I've not paid attention to that. And as soon as I start paying attention to that and looking at life through the lens of her eyes, then I start to show understanding. And I say, look, I'm sorry when you're feeling this, and here I am doing this. I'm an idiot. I am so sorry. What you need right now is this.
And the sorry has more weight.
You really exaggerated that, didn't you? It's got more weight, which is a beautiful thing.
I think that's good. That's really good. I think it's something that you said, I think, is so key that maybe you just alluded to it and I heard it in my head, but just really seek to not just always be heard, but to also listen. Like, focus on listening to what the other person's saying so that I can really hear what you're saying to me. I can stand my ground so much so that I'm not even hearing what Michelle's saying in a moment.
And not just listen to what they say, show them that you've listened and know what they say. So remember I talked about the counseling course? I reckon every person should do a counseling course on listening skills, where it teaches you the skill of reflecting. So what you're feeling is, you're angry at me because, is that what you're saying? And just simply learning those basic listening skills then, because you might understand, but you haven't yet shown that you understand. Once you show that you understand, it diffuses everything because they feel validated. It sounds really intense, doesn't it? But actually that's, of all the courses I've ever done in my life, those listening skills have helped me in my marriage more than anything else. It was really valuable training, so thanks.
When having a heart-to-heart, should it happen organically, or is it okay to intentionally initiate the conversation? So they put in quotes, honey, can we talk about something that's been on my heart? So should it happen organically with a heart-to-heart, or should you make it clear that you want to do that?
I think it has to be intentional. Because if one of you is not in that place, but the other one is, then you can feel hurt and frustrated when the other person isn't engaging. And it's often me, again, wanting the heart-to-heart. And if I don't specify that, it can, if you've got something else on your mind, or you're busy, or you've got to organize a certain amount of time, and then I feel like that time's not important, it can make me put up a barrier. And then I say things I don't mean, he can put a barrier. So I do think the heart-to-hearts need to be intentional.
I'm going to disagree with her, okay. All right? Here's why. Because I actually think it's both. I think it's both organic and planned. But what Rachel has done is, in the early days when it never happened, we were very intentional, and I changed some of my behaviors so that on a daily basis there was time for me to talk with her. That just became a rhythm. I knew that in my day there had to be time for Rachel to use up her word count. How many knows that girls have got a lot of words? Scientific fact, come on. They say double, so they've got to be used up. So I just made the decision that I was going to change the rhythms of my life so that, every morning and every evening, I'll make some time, even if it's for 5 minutes, to connect and listen and be present. By doing that, she probably now thinks, some of them are just more spontaneous, but actually it was really intentional on my part. So I think in a great healthy marriage, firstly, there is an intentionality, but second, that creates then a spontaneity.
It's probably grown into spontaneity. It just happens now.
Yeah.
Exactly right, because you were really intentional in the early days.
Yeah.
And I
That was a
think
good disagreement, wasn't it? Did you like that?
very good.
Thank you.
The other thing is like learning when they're open. Like I've noticed that, when I need to share something, I've learned, okay, I know when Derek is not in the headspace to hear this right now.
I'm always ready.
So, there were times where I'm like, I just need to get this off my chest and I'm going to just unload on him right now. And he was not in the headspace to do that. He was not in the place to do that. He was busy. He was thinking about something else. And so I've really had to learn okay, the ebb and flow. And so if I know he's not in the headspace, but I really have something on my heart to share with him or to talk about, I'll say sometimes, it'll be spontaneous sometimes. But I think, learning okay, he is not going to hear me. He's not going to understand. He's not going to focus because I know. And it's not because I'm not a priority. Because in my early years of marriage, it's well, I should be the priority. And so he should listen to me right now because I am most important. Okay, yes. But also, they're human. And so it's a communication of hey, I just have something I really need to talk to you about. Can we spend some time later? So they have time to shift and have that headspace. Because Derek will say to me early in our marriage, he'd say, I didn't get the script for the day. So in other words, I assumed that he would know what I would need him to do, and he would be like...
You can write that down, man. You can write that down. You're welcome. You're welcome.
That's brilliant.
It was so good. But yeah, I think, he should know my feelings. He should know my every thought. If he loved me, he should know I need to go on a date, and he should know I need to talk to him. They don't. And sometimes they need a couple times, actually. But I'm just saying, I think just really know it, but also communicate, I just really need some time so they can shift and have that headspace. So, yeah.
Very good. Along with the heart-to-heart, this is good. This kind of goes with it. What are some practical steps to take to improve your heart-to-hearts when one spouse is very emotionally open and the other finds it more difficult? I think that's a great question.
Well, I would say I was a 2 or 3 out of 10 in the early days of my marriage. And remember, I talked about my little man cave. And I would always say, I'm too tired, I'm whatever. Rachel was a master of gently drawing me out and being very, kind of going into the cave. And so what were some of the things that you did to draw me out and help me mature in that area?
I think gently encourage. We've got to take the confrontation out of it because that makes the other person defensive. I think the biggest obstacle to growth is defensiveness. It's the same in leadership. You try and give someone feedback or correct, and straight away defensive. We all are. So I think it's got to have a gentle approach to growing the heart to heart. It's acknowledging that. Again, it's the ownership. And I'm going to talk about this with the leaders at some point this weekend, is how to have those difficult conversations. And a big part of that, when you're confronting something, is taking ownership yourself. Even if the problem that you think is completely theirs, it's thinking about, what have I done to contribute to that problem? So if you can think about what you've done to contribute to it in some way, shape, or form, it helps the defensive wall to go down.
Some of you will have done the training about what's a person's love language. Have you done that? Gary Chapman, it's really, really valuable. We have different love languages. For me, it's touch and affirmation. So if Rachel wants to open me up, she just needs to affirm me. The defenses go down, and I'm much nicer. And she's like, that kind of stuff. Keep it going, all that stuff. Just I'm yours, whatever you need. Rachel, it's time. If I give her time, then... So I think, again, it's about you serving your spouse and figuring out what do they need, what's the way that they best communicate, and making those... So early in our marriage, I was just into sport, golf, football, everything. We've discovered over the years, we've got to do the things we can both enjoy, like running, going to coffee shops, going to movies. So yes, every guy needs their space, shooting, whatever, but you've got to then find the common grounds that you can both. And now in our lives, we have both. There's the things I love, golf, but the things we love, and make sure there's a good balance there.
I think that's, I think of the question was kind of one person is emotionally really open, the other is not. I think a lot of times there's this whole give and take of marriage too. It's like, okay, Michelle's the more emotionally open one. We all know that here in this room. And so she's going to be willing to share that. And so she has to understand that I'm the way I am. But then on my end, there's this willingness to say, I need to be stretched to go her way too. So there's this give and take as well of there's grace for me, but I need to be stretched. And so I think that's part of the answer as well. Two people kind of alluded to the whole anger. I think one of the steps you had was getting angry. Two people kind of alluded to it. I'll ask this question, but when the outside world of life and work or children's behaviors, etc., bring angry feelings, what are some ways you settle yourself so you don't take it out on each other? So that whole idea of not allowing anger
question
to come into the marriage.
Yeah, because what you'll find is when you really love someone, what I find is I can handle incredible stress and anxiety with everyone else and put on the brave face, but I'd come home and I'd subconsciously take it out on Rachel. And it took me a long time to figure out, have the emotional intelligence, the self-awareness to realize I was subconsciously doing that. And I still don't know to this day why I did that, but I just did it. And sometimes it's the people that you love the most that you can hurt the most. And so I'd be gracious to everyone else that was giving me a hard time, but I'd then just come and do that. And you've got to, I think, self-awareness. We talk very little about this in churches, but when you can start to see that you're doing that, you're halfway there. You take ownership for it, and you start to change. And Rachel's really good at just reflecting back when that's happening, because how many know your partner sees things in you that you just do not see? We're all like an iceberg. There's the bit on the top that we see, but most of the time there's all this stuff that we just don't see, but often our partner will, and it's having that emotional sensitivity, being willing to go there. It takes courage to have the difficult conversations. So that's my answer. Do you want to add to that? Because I didn't feel that was a very good answer, but anyway.
No, it was great. No, it's a really great answer, because sometimes you can feel like what you're doing and all of the stuff you've got to fit into your day and your week is more important than what they're doing. And sometimes that can be where the tension is. I've done this. Yeah, but I've been doing this, and it doesn't get you anywhere. So busyness is the biggest enemy to intimacy and to honest conversation. So it's acknowledging where each other is at and appreciating that.
Anything you want to add to that? It was a good question.
Yeah, I think something that I just, when you're coming home and you're like, you just need to vent or something. I think it's, first of all, it's clear to say, I'm just venting. I don't need you to solve my problem. I just need to talk to you. Number one. Number two, I think sometimes just when you're sharing your heart about something, it's like, first of all, you're like, I might sound passionate, but I'm not mad at you. I'm frustrated with the situation. Because sometimes, if I'm coming home and I can, surprise, be very passionate or, like, oh, this is so frustrating to me. He's like, well, why are you frustrated at me? And I said, I'm not frustrated at you. I'm just frustrated with the situation. But also validating when I'm sharing my heart, like when I'm sharing my deep wounds or my heart about something, it's like, can you just, instead of like trying to fix me, can you just be like, hey, I'm so sorry you felt that way. I'm sure that was really hard to hear. Or I'm sure that was a really hard situation, because then it's like, okay, I don't feel like I'm a jerk for feeling that way, or I'm weird, or I'm too sensitive. It's like, I'm really sorry. I'm sure that really was painful for you. Let's talk about how we can help that. And so it's like validating the frustration, but like, so you're like I'm able to be myself. I think that's the one thing is like, I feel like I'm able to be myself, but I need to be able to share how I'm feeling, even if he doesn't see it that way. Right. And to be able to have that open dialogue.
Very good.
Very, very good. Can we keep moving forward? Is that okay? You're good? Two questions. They're kind of different, but we'll put them together. Dealing with children in marriage. So how do you solve parenting style issues with disagreements so that it doesn't affect your marriage? And then someone also asked, if we can remember this, how do you, for let's say some of the new parents or parents to be out there, how do you keep this stuff in play with kids coming into the marriage soon that's new for them? So how do you deal with disagreements? It's kind of two things, but we'll put them together. How do you deal with disagreements in parenting so it doesn't affect your marriage? and then any advice to new parents still putting their marriage first. So,
Yeah, two great questions. The first one about being on the same page is one thing we've always said is you got to agree first what the strategy is going to be as parents before you go to the kids, because the kids will sniff if there's any difference, any weakness. So you got to make sure that you refuse to let kids come in and drive a wedge between you. The greatest gift you can give your kids is a healthy marriage. Let me say that again. The greatest gift you can give your kids is a healthy marriage. Let them know you two are in love. That's going to give them the security to build a life. So you got to make sure they know we're on the same page. Now, by nature, my girls call me the big softie, because I am. All right, where Rachel can be the one that's organizing them. But I make sure that if Rachel's set a boundary or whatever, or if I have, we both back each other, even if we disagree. So to the kids, no, we're going to back each other, and then we'll talk about it offline. And then if we need to make a change, we will. But to our kids, it's a united front at all times. But here is something I've learned with my girls. Get good at saying sorry when you stuff it up with your kids. Telling you, the day that I said sorry to Mercy when she was 8 years, and I said, you know what, I got it wrong there. And I said to Mercy, you got to realize this is new territory for me as a dad, and I got it wrong on that. And it just builds respect when you do that. You don't have to do that too many times to your kids, but just letting them know that sometimes as a mom or a dad, you get it wrong. That's going to help build a good relationship.
I think the way that you're both brought up will make a big difference. And we talk about this when we're preparing couples for marriage. But even when you've been married 20, 30 years, that still comes up. And they say that you get more like your mum or your dad sometimes as you get older. And so our upbringings were very different. So we sometimes have to stop and talk about that. So now we're in the stage of letting go a bit more with our girls, 17 and 22. And I would have a tendency to want to hold on a little bit more, and we need our family time. And Steve would be, let her get the train. So Mercy has a boyfriend, and she wanted to ride the train up to the other end of the country. She hadn't been on a train before, and she had to change at a stop on the way. And she's like, I want to do this, and I'm like, I don't think she should do that. That's a bit scary, doing that by herself. And Steve was going, well, you were doing that just a few months later when you went to study physiotherapy, but we didn't have this conversation in front of them. I said, so what we'll say is, I'll talk to Dad about that. Because otherwise they start to talk to me, and if they don't get the response from me, they'll come to you. So eventually we talk it through, and eventually I backed down and I let her get the train, and everything was good.
Again, anything you guys want to add? Or?
I think having another couple in your life, preferably older, or I should say, who have been married, whoever. I just think that if you come to this crossroads of we just can't agree on this, you need to maybe bring an unbiased party in who's going to really hear you out and be maybe an interpreter to people, or to for you guys. But I really think that we should find someone who we can talk to about these things, like marriage. I think so many times it breaks my heart because people pull away when they start having trouble, and it's like, man, that's the worst thing for you to do, because then you feel all alone. It's really the best thing for you to find someone. I'm not saying shout it from the rooftops. Please don't get on social media and share your worst pains. I'm not saying that. I'm saying find someone trusted who you can say hey, I'm just really struggling with this, and be vulnerable to that one person, to that one couple.
Well, I would say spread it. Very good. In churches, we always want the pastor. There's only so many conversations these guys can have. They can't do it for every couple in a church of your size. So we've always intentionally had 2 or 3 other more seasoned people that we ask. And we see them as like coaches, where they speak into our lives, whether it's about marriage, finance. The more you can get mentors and coaches to help you do life, the better it's going to be. So I'm always looking for those seasoned people that we can talk about how we're raising our kids. And again, you've done that brilliantly over the years.
As well, being intentional about reading books and listening to podcasts on marriage and family, because you've never got enough experience to feel like you're doing it well. There's still more to learn. So I'm reading one at the minute about how to raise girls and at this season, at this stage in life, because there's always more to learn.
Yeah, I think the one thing I would add about the whole parenting thing is I think you have to make a decision that nothing's going to get in between you and your spouse, including your kids. And, you see it a lot in people's lives, and I don't want to look at anybody in the room, but it's easy to allow the kids to be the most important part of your lives when really this should be the most important relationship. And I'm not going to allow disciplining the kids or dealing with the kids to come in between us. We're going to find some common ground. And we're going to be intentional is the word. We're going to be intentional about this marriage, and we're not going to disagree about kids and make that come between us. And so I think it's not allowing the kids to do that.
I just really wanted to add something quick that the Lord just put on my heart. Just a couple of years ago, I was really, kind of like just thinking about life, and we maybe had a spat or something, or I don't know, maybe I was talking to even Rach, but I think that the Lord showed me that I was giving my marriage the leftover time and the leftover priority. And there was never going to be enough time. It was like I was giving Derek like the leftover energy that I had, the leftover thought, the leftover time. And I just think that it was a challenge for me that I was like, I had to put him first, and then everything else has to come after that. And so I just really felt to share that. It was a challenge to me that I was like, oh, I'll get to him later. Oh, he'll be there all the time. And I was taking that for granted, and I wasn't investing my mental energy and my physical energy. So I just wanted to just say that there's never going to be time. We have to make time.
What do we have time for? One more? This one's pretty deep. And obviously we can't take too long, but this is a really deep one and maybe affects more people than we realize. But simple question, how do you heal from your spouse having an affair, physically, emotionally, whatever, but how do you really heal from that kind of an experience?
Look, I think we can try and trivialize that and give a quick 1-minute answer, and that would be really unfair, because the depth of the wound when trust and covenant is broken, I can only imagine. So whoever wrote that, bless you for having the courage, and we're not going to diminish that with a little platitude. What we can say is that God's grace helps you to do what you cannot do in your own strength. This is where God's goodness and loving loyalty. There was a story in the Old Testament of a preacher who God told to marry a prostitute. And his name's Hosea and her name is Gomer. And God said, marry her. Like, everyone's going to think I'm an idiot marrying a prostitute. He married her. Things went well. They had 3 kids together. And then what happened? She went back to being a prostitute. And God said to Hosea, I want you to go into that whorehouse and pay a price to release her. He said, why would God do that to a preacher? Because he said, now you know how I feel. Because God married himself to us lot. I mean, look at us. And how many times have we hurt him and been disloyal? So God's grace, God knows how it is. He knows the pain of being abandoned and hurt. And it's only him. But the good news is we've met many great marriages that have survived it and actually grown through it. But there's probably always that bit of pain. And that's not necessarily going to go away. It's going to take an immense amount of courage and an immense amount of God's grace. But he's able to do exceedingly and abundantly above all that you can ask or think. So I don't know whether you want to add anything, Rach, to that. In fact, we're going to spend a bit of time praying for you. And, I think that was and I didn't know Derek was going to ask that question, but what a question. Because the truth is, as you've sat there, some of you have probably thought, well, it's all right for Steve and Rachel. We're in a right mess here. You know what? Anything in the Christian life, any principle, any red flag that we put up, we've got to have the courage to admit we can't do this in our own strength. The Christian faith was never meant to be lived on your own. The beauty of this is that we're in a church and we can invite Jesus in to help us do the things that we can't. We're not a religion that just gives you laws and rules and commandments. Christianity is about Jesus. would you come in? I don't know whether you, before we pray, why don't you add something, Rach?
I had a couple of things I wrote down in here just to lead us into this time of prayer together. And you've all heard the importance of, and we say it at weddings, is keeping Jesus in the center of your marriage. And we know that, but actually knowing how to do that is so important. And we see with married couples all of the time, the closer they are in their relationship with God, the closer they will be together, the threefold cord that can't be broken. Colossians 2:10 says, you are complete in him. You are complete in him, the head. So Steve doesn't complete me. You know, we talk a lot about, my other half or my better half. Actually, you're two whole pieces that are coming together. And so Steve talks a lot about the early years of our marriage and all of his downfalling. Some of our early ones was my lack of confidence and insecurity, and I would lean to Steve subconsciously for my identity and who it would make me feel, or even in ministry, I'd feel more confident if we were together. And the other area of marriage that's so important is having a sense of purpose. And I write about it a little bit in the book. Every single person needs to know that they have a sense of purpose, being fulfilled in what you do, seeing your dreams come to pass. Now, I would rely on Steve for some of that too. So relying on him for my purpose or my identity is not going to keep our marriage strong. And I grew up in church. I was a pastor's daughter, but I fell into that trap. And so if I were to draw you a horizontal axis, that is my relationship with God, and then the vertical axis, which is my relationship with God, the horizontal axis is me. On one side is my purpose, the other side is identity. Now, if I start relying on Steve, that's going to tip either side. But I've got to keep, or in what I do, I've got to keep my sense of purpose and my identity in my relationship with God first and foremost. That's the priority, and it'll keep the horizontal relationship strong.
Amen. Beautiful. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to spend the next 26 minutes praying. Derek and Michelle have picked out some beautiful, godly couples. If you're new to this church, they're recognized by this church. They're lay ministers and pastors, and they've got a lot of experience, a lot of wisdom. And we would love, between us and these other couples, to pray for as many as we can. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to play some beautiful worship music in a moment, and we're going to invite you all to come and stand as a couple at the front, all the way across. So some of you guys go over that side, and then we're just going to move across, all six of us. And it doesn't matter who you get to pray for you. That's not important. The important thing is we're going to invite Christ into the center of your marriage, because every marriage needs Christ. Now, we're going to ask you these really simple questions. Where do you think your marriage is? You know, we talked about the 4 zones. Is it hot? Is it warm? Is it cool? Is it cold? Just have the courage to say, well, it's actually here. And then we're going to say, where do you want it to be? Yeah. And is there any one thing we can pray for? And then we're going to pray practically and spiritually for every couple. Is that okay if we do that? Is there anything you want to add, guys?
As you get prayer, we just want to encourage you, just step away and go back to your seat so we know who got prayer. But also, please don't leave until the very end, because I know Steve and Rachel just want to give just a final blessing. We just encourage you, after you got prayer, as you're waiting for prayer, just to kind of invite the Holy Spirit to come in and just have conversations or talk about something, or just share your heart. Be vulnerable. This is a safe place. And all of the people that will be praying for you are very safe, pastors, elders. And so we just want to encourage you to come forward. So why don't we start the music, Rick? And if you guys could just come forward and just make a line. What's that? Yeah, and the prayers can come behind. But just come forward. We just want to really just bless and impart to you.